There's a specific kind of quiet that settles over an office long after everyone else has gone home. It's a silence filled only with the low hum of machines and the sound of your own typing, a feeling of being the only person left holding the entire world together. For 10 years, I told myself this was dedication, that the long hours and the quiet sacrifices were an investment in my future. I believed my loyalty would be seen, that my hard work would eventually be rewarded. I never imagined that the very foundation I built for others would be the one they decided to pull out from under me. This is the story of what happens when your dedication is mistaken for convenience, and your loyalty is rewarded with betrayal. So if you're watching this right now, maybe in your car, maybe on your lunch break, just tell me one thing. Where are you listening from? Drop your city or country in the comments. I want to know how far this story travels, and if something in you recognizes something in this, stay with me. My name is Sarah, and for 10 years, I served as the senior systems architect at a technology firm that sold itself on the promise of innovation and forward thinking. My official title, however, never quite captured the reality of my role. I was the company's ghost, the silent, invisible force that kept the entire structure from collapsing. When a critical system failed at 2 in the morning, it was my phone that buzzed with panicked messages and my fingers that flew across the keyboard in the dark, patching the complex code that nobody else fully understood, preventing the kind of catastrophic data loss that would have ended a lesser company. When our chief executive officer, Ryan, had a last-minute presentation for major investors, it was me rewriting his slides, turning his vague, buzzword-filled notes into a coherent and compelling vision just minutes before the call began. I was the calm voice that soothed angry clients, promising solutions that only I knew how to build, effectively doing the work of 3 people for the salary of 1. Despite the company's exponential growth, a success built squarely on the stability of the systems I had designed and maintained, my own compensation had remained stagnant for 3 years. The lack of recognition was a quiet, persistent ache. Ryan, with his polished shoes and a smile that never quite reached his eyes, was a master of subtle condescension. He once slid his expensive laptop onto my desk with a dismissive wave. "Sarah, can you just pretty this up for me?" he'd asked. He was talking about the foundational code for our flagship product. He would later present that same prettied-up code in a board meeting, explaining its intricacies as if he had spent weeks crafting it himself. I remember the slight tightening in my chest, a feeling I had learned to ignore as I simply nodded and got to work. My role was clear: to be the dependable engine that ran silently, never demanding attention. But last Tuesday, the silence was broken. I was walking past the main server room late in the evening, the office floor hushed and empty save for the low hum of the machines. The door to Ryan's glass-walled office was slightly ajar, and I heard voices from inside. It was him and the head of human resources. "It's not about her performance," I heard Ryan say, his voice low and conspiratorial, stripped of the confident charm he usually performed for an audience. "Her work is fine, it's just she's been here too long." There was a pause, and then he added the words that would echo in my mind for days. "She won't be as flexible anymore." Flexible, I realized with a sudden, cold clarity, was corporate language for obedient. It meant being willing to sacrifice weekends without complaint, to accept praise as a substitute for promotion, and to never question the growing imbalance of the entire arrangement. They went silent the moment my shadow fell across their doorway. I didn't let them see that I had heard. My pace didn't falter. My expression remained a practiced mask of neutral calm. I just smiled faintly, continued onto my desk, and kept working as if it were just another night. But as I sat there, staring into the glow of my monitor, something inside me, something that had been dormant for a very long time, finally shifted, like a gear locking into a new, unyielding position. The shift inside me was quiet, a hardening of resolve that went unnoticed by everyone around me. For the next few days, I continued my work with the same meticulous attention to detail, preparing the system for the most important product launch in the company's history. Then, on Friday afternoon, an email landed in my inbox. It was a company-wide announcement celebrating the project's final stages, filled with corporate praise and self-congratulatory language. My eyes scanned the paragraphs, but then they stopped. The email lavished praise on a junior developer named Brent for his outstanding leadership, painting him as the hero of the hour. I had spent countless hours guiding him through the system's complexities, patiently explaining the very architectural principles he was now being celebrated for pioneering. My name, the name of the woman who had architected the entire platform from a blank screen, was nowhere to be found. It was a strange, hollow feeling, as if I were a ghost watching them rewrite the history I had lived. I read the email 3 times, my hand frozen on the mouse. This wasn't an oversight. It was a deliberate public erasure, a carefully crafted narrative designed to write me out of my own story before I was even gone. A cold stillness spread through me, the kind that quiets your breathing and makes the background noise of the office fade into nothing. Later that day, as I walked down the main hallway, I saw the head of human resources approaching. Our eyes met for a fraction of a second, and I saw a flicker of recognition in hers, followed by an immediate practiced coldness. She gave a tight, almost imperceptible nod and quickly looked away. It was the kind of look you give to a piece of furniture you are about to replace, not a colleague of 10 years. In that moment, I understood that to the company, 10 years of service was not an asset to be valued, but a line item on a spreadsheet that had become inconvenient. That evening, I went home and navigated to a secure, heavily encrypted drive on my personal computer. There, sitting by itself, was a single file with a simple, stark name: insurance policy. I had created it after the quarterly review 6 months prior, the one where Ryan had seamlessly presented my breakthrough in data compression as his own personal epiphany. That was the day I knew I couldn't trust him. The file wasn't a virus or a tool for sabotage. It wouldn't destroy a single line of data. It would simply make the entire system a beautiful locked box that only its true architect could open. It was a silent fail-safe written not out of malice, but as a final measure to ensure that the work I had poured my life into could never be fully controlled by those who refused to understand or respect it. I opened the file, its quiet lines of logic appearing on my screen, and I began the final preparations. My hands didn't shake as I worked. My resolve was as cool and clear as the lines of code before me. The system itself, in its attempt to remove me, would provide the trigger. They were about to hand me the weapon and pull the trigger for me. The following Monday arrived with a sense of cold, inevitable gravity. The air in the office was thick with unspoken words, with colleagues offering tight, nervous smiles before quickly looking away. I ignored it all, focusing on my work with a placid exterior that betrayed none of the resolve building within me. At precisely 4:30 in the afternoon, the summons I had been expecting finally dropped into my inbox. It was a calendar invitation from the head of human resources, its subject line a single, sterile word: meeting. There was no agenda, no context, just a cold, impersonal block of time. I took a deep breath, saved my files one last time, closed my applications, and began the long walk to the main conference room. I was not walking to my execution. I was walking to the beginning of theirs. Ryan and the director of human resources were already seated at the vast, empty table, an awkward distance between them. Neither of them looked comfortable. I chose to remain standing at the head of the table, a silent refusal to join their tableau. Ryan cleared his throat, his gaze fixed on a point on the wall just over my shoulder. "We'll get straight to it," he began, the words sounding rehearsed, stripped of all emotion. "The company is undergoing a significant restructuring. We've had to make some difficult decisions." He finally risked a glance at me. "Effective immediately, your position is being terminated." As he spoke, the Human Resources Director slid a thick folder across the table towards me. "We appreciate your years of service," she added mechanically. "Your severance package is detailed in here." I didn't respond. I simply picked up the folder and began to read through the pages with the same dispassionate focus I would give to a technical document. The severance amount was generous, a clear attempt to buy my silence, but my eyes scanned past the numbers, searching for the fine print I knew would be there. And I found it. Tucked away on page 5, buried in a dense paragraph of legal language, was a sentence requiring my signature to acknowledge that my departure was due to performance standards not being met. It was a quiet, vicious little trap. By signing, I would be validating their false narrative and taking the blame for any future failures that might arise from my absence. A convenient ghost to blame when the machine I built began to falter without me. A slow, knowing silence filled the room as I placed the papers back on the table, leaving them unsigned. For the first time, I met Ryan's gaze directly, and I saw him flinch. He couldn't hold it. I then took my company laptop, the device that held the keys to his entire kingdom, and gently placed it on the table beside the folder. "I hope the investors enjoy the presentation," I said, my voice soft but clear. I then turned to the Human Resources Director. "Am I being escorted out?" She hesitated, then nodded. The walk through the office was a quiet, surreal parade past the faces of people I had worked with for a decade. As the main glass doors slid shut behind me, I glanced at my watch, not with anxiety, but with precision. The countdown had begun. The system I built was more than just code. It was an extension of my logic. It had been designed to know the exact moment it was no longer in my possession, and in that moment, it would remember who its true creator was. I walked a few blocks, the city noise a welcome buffer against the sterile silence of the office I had just left. I found a quiet, anonymous cafe on a corner, the air inside filled with the rich smell of coffee and the low murmur of conversations I wasn't a part of. It felt grounding. I ordered a black coffee and took a seat by the window, placing my phone face down on the table. I didn't feel anger or even satisfaction. What I felt was a strange and profound calm, the stillness of a chess player who has just made a decisive move and is now simply waiting for their opponent to realize the game is already over. The 10-minute mark passed without any fanfare. There was no explosion, no alarm. In my small corner of the world, nothing had changed. But somewhere, 5 stories above the city street, my insurance policy was waking up. Its trigger wasn't an attack, but the company's own standard procedure, my administrative credentials being revoked, and my laptop being connected to their network under a different user. The system's own protocol was about to become its undoing. The first sign of trouble arrived exactly as I had anticipated. My phone vibrated against the wood of the table, a single, soft buzz. I turned it over. It was a text message from Owen, a bright junior engineer I had taken under my wing, one of the few people who showed genuine curiosity for the work rather than just the title. His message was confused, not accusatory. "Hey Sarah," it read. "Something weird is happening with the demo environment. It's like the entire system is frozen in read-only mode. Brent can't execute any of the primary scripts, and every command he tries just returns an access error. Did you happen to push a final security update before you left?" A small, almost imperceptible smile touched my lips. It was a testament to the code's elegance that it appeared as a frustrating glitch, not a deliberate act. I took a slow sip of my coffee before typing a calm, simple reply. "No updates from me, Owen. You should probably check with Ryan. He's overseeing the final preparations now." With that, I had placed the problem squarely back into the hands of the man who had created it, while simultaneously giving an innocent colleague a safe path away from the fallout. I had no quarrel with Owen. My quarrel was with the system that exploited people like him. Seconds after I sent the message, my phone buzzed again, this time with more urgency. It was from Ryan. The message was blunt, stripped of any professional courtesy. "What's going on? Call me now." It was the familiar bark of a man who believed any problem could be solved if he just yelled at it loud enough. A man who was used to being in control and was just beginning to feel that control slip through his fingers. I read his message, then read it again. There was no spike of fear, no triumphant rush of adrenaline. There was only the quiet finality of a door being closed for good. I turned my phone over again, placing it face down on the table, silencing the demands of a world I no longer belonged to. I looked out the window, watching people walk by, living their ordinary lives, completely unaware of the quiet, contained chaos that was just beginning to bloom in an office high above. Ryan still believed this was a simple technical issue, a temporary bug he could command someone to fix. He thought he had all the time in the world. He was wrong. An hour passed. I had finished my coffee and was now just watching the late afternoon light filter through the window, feeling a sense of detachment that was almost peaceful. My phone remained face down, a silent testament to my refusal to engage. Eventually it buzzed again. It wasn't the frantic, repeated vibration of a phone call, but the single, polite notification of a new text. It was Owen again. I hesitated for a moment, then turned the phone over. His message was longer this time, a running commentary on the escalating chaos I had unleashed. The picture he painted was one of quiet, controlled panic. Ryan, he wrote, had been storming in and out of the server room, his face a mask of fury. Brent, the newly appointed lead, was sitting at my old desk, sweating and staring helplessly at a screen of cascading error messages. The rest of the team was just trying to look busy, afraid to make eye contact with their failing leadership. Then, Owen's narrative took a new turn. About 30 minutes ago, Ryan had made a dramatic move. He had brought in an external consultant, a so-called hotshot, from a high-priced downtown firm known for solving impossible technical crises. Owen described him as arrogant and dismissive, a man who had walked in, taken one look at the situation, and boasted that he could have the system unlocked within the hour. He had immediately shooed the internal team away, claiming he worked better without an audience. But an hour turned into 2, and the consultant's confident swagger had slowly evaporated. According to Owen, not only had he failed to unlock the demo environment, but his attempts to bypass my security protocols had triggered a deeper level of system lockdowns. He was now locked out of the diagnostic tools themselves. The final part of Owen's text made me exhale a slow, deliberate breath. The consultant, in a desperate attempt to save his own reputation in front of a furious Ryan, had declared the system itself to be the problem. He had called my architecture a dangerously convoluted and deliberately undocumented black box. The insult was, ironically, the highest possible compliment. It was an admission from a supposed expert that the system was a perfect, seamless creation, so intertwined with my own logic that it was incomprehensible to anyone else. My work wasn't flawed. It was simply and completely mine. It was in that moment, reading those words, that I felt the first true sense of validation, not from revenge, but from the undeniable logical truth of the situation. The system was working exactly as intended. Just as I was processing this, another text message lit up my screen. It was Ryan. The tone was completely transformed from his earlier demand. There was no anger, only a thin veil of civility draped over raw desperation. "Sarah, okay, I understand," it read. "We need to talk, please." I read the word please and felt nothing. It was a word he had never used with me in 10 years. A few moments later, my phone began to ring, but the number on the screen was one I didn't recognize. I let it go to voicemail, refusing to be drawn in. I assumed it was Ryan, trying again from a different phone. But the message notification that appeared seconds later began with a name I never, ever expected to see. My finger hovered over the delete button, my mind already dismissing the voicemail as another of Ryan's desperate tactics. But the text preview of the transcription held me captive. The first words were not a plea, but a name. Dana. With a sense of cautious curiosity, I played the message. The voice was calm and steady. Dana had been a brilliant project manager, another woman who, like me, had poured years into the company only to quietly vanish one day, the victim of what Ryan had vaguely termed performance issues. Her message was short, devoid of drama, but it struck me with the force of a physical blow. "Sarah," she said, "I heard through the grapevine what's happening over there today. They did the same thing to me. I just wanted to say, good for you." It cracked open the carefully constructed wall of isolation I had built around myself. That simple validation from a fellow ghost of the company's past shattered the narrative I had started to believe myself, that I was difficult, or that my standards were too high, that my requests for clear documentation were slowing things down, or that my focus on system stability over flashy, rushed features was a sign I didn't understand the market. It wasn't me. It had never been just me. It was a pattern, a system designed to push out anyone who valued integrity over obedience. A profound sense of relief washed over me, so potent it was almost dizzying. I wasn't crazy. I was just right. As I sat with this newfound clarity, I opened a web browser on my phone and navigated to a popular tech industry blog. There it was on the front page, an article published less than an hour ago. The headline was cautious but ominous. Startup Darling Mason Tech hit with unexpected technical failure hours before key investor showcase. The article was filled with speculation, quoting anonymous sources close to the company who spoke of internal mismanagement. The irony was palpable. I was the ultimate anonymous source, yet my story was being told not in leaked quotes, but in the silent, stubborn refusal of a system to betray its creator. The story was no longer contained within the company walls. A moment later, a new text from Owen confirmed the severity of the situation. He said one of the lead investors was now threatening to pull all funding by noon the next day if the demo wasn't functional. The stakes had just been raised from professional embarrassment to total financial collapse. It was in that moment that my phone began to ring again. I looked down, and this time the screen displayed his name in plain letters. Ryan. There was nowhere left for him to hide. A part of me wanted to let it ring, to let him suffocate in the silence he had created, but that felt incomplete. He deserved nothing from me, but I deserved an ending. An ending to the years of being overlooked, to the quiet condescension, and to the slow erasure of my professional worth. This one conversation would be the final, definitive period on a 10-year-long sentence. The ringing stopped, then immediately started again, more insistent this time. I took one last deep breath and I answered. I answered the call, but I said nothing. I simply held the phone to my ear and listened to the silence, waiting. On the other end of the line, I could hear the faint, ragged sound of Ryan's breathing, a stark contrast to the confident, commanding voice I had known for a decade. He was the first to break. "Sarah," he said, his voice hoarse, stripped of all its usual arrogance. "Listen to me, okay? Just listen. I was wrong. I handled things badly and I underestimated you. I see that now." His apology was a tactic, not a confession. He wasn't sorry for what he did. He was sorry that it had backfired on him so spectacularly. He was a strategist realizing he had made a fatal error and was now trying to undo his move before the final checkmate. I remained silent, letting him fill the void with his own mounting panic. His words started to tumble out, a desperate waterfall of promises and bargains. "Look, we can fix this," he pleaded. "The investors are walking. The board is calling for my head, but if you come in, if you just unlock the system, we can make this right." He started throwing titles and numbers at me, things he had systematically denied me for years. He offered me the role of Chief Technology Officer, a position he had always insisted the company wasn't ready for. He offered me a salary that was double what I had ever made, then threw in a significant share of the company's equity. "Full autonomy, Sarah," he promised, his voice cracking slightly. "You name it, it's yours. A full partnership. Just tell me what you want." As he spoke, I held the phone slightly away from my ear, observing his unraveling with a kind of clinical detachment. This was the real Ryan, the man behind the curtain of charisma and power, a terrified little king watching his kingdom crumble because he had banished the one person who knew how to keep the walls from falling down. He had built his empire on my work, and in his arrogance, he had forgotten that he didn't own the blueprints. When his frantic monologue finally ran out of steam, his last offer hanging in the air like dust, the silence that followed was heavy and absolute. In the quiet, I heard him whisper one last broken question. "Sarah, what is it you want?" That was my cue. I took a slow, steadying breath, not because I was nervous, but to anchor myself in the finality of the moment. My voice, when I spoke, was not loud, but it was perfectly clear, carrying the weight of 10 years of unspoken truths. "I don't want your title, Ryan," I said softly. "I want to see what you do without me." I pressed the end call button on the screen before he could utter another word. The connection was severed. The silence that followed in my small corner of the cafe was absolute, and yet it felt like the loudest, most definitive sound I had ever heard. The game was over. The next morning, I didn't wake up with a sense of triumph. I woke up with a feeling of quiet emptiness, the kind of stillness that follows a violent storm. I made coffee and resisted the urge to search for news about the company. The story would find me when it was ready. And it did. An hour later, a push notification lit up my phone's screen from the same tech blog I had been following. The headline was no longer speculative. It was definitive, brutal, and swift. Mason Tech implodes. Chief Executive Officer Ryan Mason ousted after disastrous investor demo. The article detailed how major backers had pulled their funding overnight, citing a catastrophic loss of faith in the company's technical leadership and operational stability. I read the words without emotion. It was the logical, inevitable conclusion to a series of choices he had made long ago. He hadn't been defeated by me. He had been defeated by his own arrogance. I set my phone aside, ready to finally put the past behind me, when a new email notification appeared. It was the sender's name that made me pause. Claire Vance. I recognized her name immediately. She was one of the most respected venture capitalists in the Valley, the lead investor in Ryan's latest round of funding, known for her sharp intellect and no-nonsense approach to business. I braced myself for a request for information, or perhaps an accusation, but her message was short, professional, and utterly unexpected. It didn't mention Ryan or the chaos at all. Sarah, it began, I have been following your architectural work for some time and was sorry to hear you've recently left your position. I would be very interested to hear what you are planning to build next. Would you be available for coffee this week? The email wasn't an offer to fix a broken company. It was an invitation to create a new one. It was the first time in a decade someone had reached out to me based on the merit of my work, not the title on my business card. Before I could even begin to formulate a reply, one final text message came through. It was from Owen. Just so you know, I handed in my resignation this morning. He wrote, it was time. I know it's none of my business, but whatever you decide to do next, if you ever need someone who still believes in building something real, I want to be a part of it. I stared at the two messages on my screen, an offer of capital from a respected investor and a pledge of loyalty from a talented engineer. For years, I had kept a private folder on my computer, a collection of wireframes and ideas for a project I called Someday. It was a platform built on the principles of simplicity and respect for the user, everything my old company was not. It had always been a distant dream, but looking at the messages on my phone, I realized with a sudden, startling clarity that maybe someday was now. I replied to Claire's email that same day, and we scheduled a meeting for the end of the week. That evening, Owen and I met at a small coffee shop, the air thick with the smell of roasted beans and possibility. We spread my old notes and wireframes for the Someday project across the table, and for the first time in years, I felt a spark of genuine creative energy. There was no corporate oversight, no sales-driven pressure, just two engineers excited to build something clean, logical, and useful. We worked for hours, refining the vision, sketching out a user interface, and building a simple but functional prototype. It was a partnership built on mutual respect, a feeling that had been completely absent in my previous role. By the time we left, we didn't just have an idea, we had a plan. I arrived at the address Claire had sent, expecting a quiet one-on-one conversation. Instead, she led me into a sleek, glass-walled boardroom. Seated at the table next to her were two other familiar faces, two of the lead investors who had walked out of Ryan's failed presentation just days earlier. For a moment, the air left my lungs. The stakes were suddenly much higher than I had anticipated, but then a sense of calm settled over me. These men had already seen the result of empty promises and inflated egos. All I had to offer them was the quiet, unvarnished truth. I didn't mention my old company once. I didn't need to. I simply laid out the vision for my new platform, focusing on the solid architecture, the ethical approach to user data, and the clear path to profitability. Owen then gave a flawless demonstration of the prototype we had built. When we finished, a long silence filled the room. Then, one of the investors leaned back in his chair, a slow smile spreading across his face. "This," he said, his voice firm with conviction, "is what we thought we were getting in the first place." By the end of the meeting, we had secured our first round of seed funding. I walked out of that building into the afternoon sun, the weight of the last 10 years feeling for the first time not like an anchor holding me down, but like a solid foundation to build upon. 6 months later, the chaos of my departure had faded into a distant memory. Our new company, the one born from the ashes of my Someday folder, was thriving. We didn't have a flashy downtown office, just a modest, sunlit space where ideas were valued more than egos. The work was challenging, but the atmosphere was collaborative, built on the mutual respect Owen and I had established from day one. We were building a loyal client base who appreciated our transparent approach and the clean, reliable system we had created. For the first time in my career, I wasn't just building a product, I was building a culture, and it was one I was proud of. I no longer felt like a ghost in the machine. I was the architect, in every sense of the word. One rainy Tuesday morning, I stopped at a small coffee shop a few blocks from our new office. As I waited for my order, my eyes scanned the room and landed on a familiar figure sitting alone in a corner. It was Ryan. He looked smaller somehow, stripped of the aura of power and authority he used to wear like a custom-tailored suit. His shoulders were slumped. His face was etched with a tiredness that went deeper than a lack of sleep. Our eyes met across the room, and I saw a flicker of recognition, followed by a complex storm of emotions: anger, shame, and something that looked almost like regret. He straightened up, a flicker of his old self returning, and he made a move to stand as if to finally have the confrontation he was denied months ago. In that moment, I felt nothing. No surge of victory, no lingering bitterness, no desire for him to see how well I was doing. His story and mine were no longer connected. I held his gaze for a beat, then gave a single, slight, and neutral nod. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't a challenge. It was simply an acknowledgement, a final closing of a door. Then I turned away, picked up my coffee, and walked out into the rain, not looking back. The best revenge wasn't watching his empire crumble. The true victory was the quiet joy of building my own, the peace that comes from creating something that doesn't need to diminish others in order to shine. And that was more than enough. In the end, my story is proof that silence isn't weakness. Sometimes, letting the consequences speak for themselves is the most intelligent move you can make. It's a reminder that your value is not determined by those who refuse to see it, but by the solid foundation you build for yourself when you decide to walk away. If you have ever felt invisible in a place you gave your all to, or quietly left a situation that no longer deserved you, know that you are not alone. If this story spoke to you, like, comment, and share it with someone who's still finding their own voice.